This is Business Rockstars from the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. I'm Jeannie Yerman. Our guest is Tony Mugavero. He is the co-founder and CEO of Little Star, based here in New York City. Nice to see you.
Awesome, thanks for having me.
So you have a background in media, tech, and actually engineering, which is kind of interesting. And you've been part of several tech companies. So Little Star is not your first. Before we get to Little Star, which is involved in AR and VR, did you ever have like just a classic corporate job?
I did, yeah, I did. I actually had a couple. So I went to SMU for computer engineering, and when I came out of school, I worked for a logistics company in Dallas, which was doing satellite tracking for the trucking transportation industry, and watching trucks go across the U.S. and trying to be as efficient as possible, which was hard from an engineering perspective. This was before we had GPS in our phones, and so, it was interesting, but not where my heart was. I loved media and tech, and so so I moved to New York City to get a job in media technology and worked on video streaming and content delivery networks. And so I was really taking my passion of creating music and video and pairing that up with engineering. So I realized through that process, though, that I didn't like really working for anybody else, and so I worked there for a few years, and it was good to have a foundation of corporate culture and an understanding of what it's like to work in a large organization, but I needed to start my own thing. So after a few years of that, I started my own company. So that's how I got into it.
So it sounds like your exit from the corporate world was kind of methodical. That you were, like you say, you were kind of picking up bits and pieces of what you could take with you into the entrepreneurial world. Do you feel like you just have a really good gut instinct for being an entrepreneur? How much have you had to learn versus how much do you think is instinct?
I think there's a lot of it is instinct. Not saying that it can't be learned, but when I was 13 years old, I was borrowing my friend's lawnmower to go around and knock on doors to ask people if I could mow their lawn to make $10 to buy my own video games, and fixing people's bikes for $5 a pop or whatever. And so that was just my mind when I was a young teenager, and that I started a record label in college, and so my brain just always worked like that. And I knew that going to school was important for me to go through that piece of this puzzle, and then same thing with working in the corporate world. I wanted to have that experience, but my heart was always in entrepreneurship. So, when I started to plan my exit from the corporate world, it did take some planning. You have to think about having enough of a cushion, and do you take some consulting work, and so you want to have a little bit of comfort in knowing that if things don't go the right way, you still have some wiggle. So yeah.
Right, have a contingency plan, right? So when you made that shift and you're an entrepreneur, and your first company was what, Gigbeat?
Yeah, that was one of them. The one that was before that was called Mugavero, which was a video streaming technology company, and had customers like Pepsi and American Airlines and China. Yeah, so they were streaming HR training videos and marketing videos, and this was in 2009, so it was kind of the rise of YouTube and even the professional versions of YouTube. So online video was exploding, and so I designed a system based on all the things that I had learned to make that fairly simple, and I owned 100% of it, and worked with a few other people to build that and get it off the ground to where it was, and then ultimately that was acquired in 2012, which I had to make that decision of, do I want to sell it or try to keep going, and I chose to sell it. So yeah.
Two questions before we go to a break. First off, with one of your companies, Galvanize Inc., am I confused? You've been a mentor to startups. Was that part of Galvanize?
Yeah, exactly.
So, as you were mentoring other people in startups, what do you feel were some of the biggest blind spots that they had?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them, which I made. I made all the similar mistakes, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, somebody has a really great idea and they want to go execute it, and they all have different needs that they need to address that they might not be seeing. And, you know, a lot of times I see probably one of the biggest things happen over and over again, and you know, I learned this the hard way as well, is if you come up with an idea, you are more inclined to fight hard for that idea, even if it's the wrong idea. And entrepreneurs make that mistake over and over again, where they come up with an idea, they lean into it, it's the wrong thing, but it's their thing. So they're gonna prove to everybody that it's right, instead of exploring options and how they might be able to either pivot or, you know, have a slight change in direction, which can have a material impact on the outcome of the business. And, you know, Airbnb had that, Instagram had that, you know, Facebook had that. There were all slight changes or major changes in direction that had a big impact. And so I see entrepreneurs make that mistake over and over. And when anybody pitches an idea to me, you know, I see that struggle happening real time when I'm trying to give feedback based on my experience, and they're like trying to wedge me into their thing. And I'm like, okay, you know, whatever.
So it sounds like they need to have a more flexible mindset.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, be like water.
All right, so we're going to cut to break now. This is Business Rockstars at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. I'm Jeannie Yerman with Tony Mugavero. We'll have more in just a minute. This is Business Rockstars from the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. I'm Jeannie Yerman, and our guest is Tony Mugavero. He is the co-founder and CEO of Little Star. So let's talk about Little Star and what it is you guys do. You're involved with AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality.
That's right.
So let's get more specific though. What do you do with that technology?
Yeah, so we're kind of like, you know, the simplest analogy is maybe like the Netflix of VR and AR. We're a premium destination for immersive content. So consumers come to us, they interact with our applications, and they're consuming primarily immersive content, either virtual reality or now augmented reality. And we work with all the big studios like Disney, Sony Pictures, Fox, big broadcasters, all the major publishers, Hearst and Gannett, et cetera, all the big record labels. So we became experts in this space of moving this content around the world, but also thinking about the technology and this new paradigm of human-computer interaction, which is way different than something like a touchscreen on a phone. And so there's a lot of nuances that go into that, a lot of new hardware. We have to work very closely with Sony on the PlayStation VR and Google on Daydream and Microsoft with Windows Mixed Reality. And we're working with their hardware engineers a year in advance before products come to market, and then working with movie studios to optimize that content for those devices so that when the content is released and the products are released, there is a clean, beautiful, very simple, elegant interface for consumers to have access to this content. So that's primarily the role we played in the ecosystem. And you know, we on the back end license our technology to power other companies' direct-to-consumer applications. So we power like Sci-Fi VR under NBC Universal. CNN VR's apps are powered by us. So we power about 160 apps, and our tech lives on about 100 million devices. So, you know, we spent a number of years really focusing on that pipeline and the content type and working with the big media companies to bring them into this new world of how content and storytelling works.
So let's talk about kind of staffing a company like this. Mm-hmm. What is it like? Because I imagine you have a lot of people that have to be tech-minded. That's a very competitive area to try and draw employees. What is it like to get those employees and keep them? What do you do? What's your method? Mm-hmm. Or do you not want to give away the secret sauce?
No. You know, being involved in the community and building trust is, I feel like, how you find the most talented people. And so we spend a lot of time opening up our space for community events and also attending community events and going to meet really smart people. There's also, we've done this on a number of occasions, but finding industries that are kind of tangential in some way to what we're actually doing and building, they're perfect fits for what we're doing. They're just doing it in a different context. So, the gaming industry, for example, if you want to do something in VR, you can go find somebody from the gaming industry and bring them into VR because they're working with the same tools and the same engines and things like that. So, we've been very lucky by staying active in the community and kind of thinking outside of the box, especially in a place like New York where Facebook and Google have big offices, and they are also trying to come after the same talent that we are.
So what would you say, if you just had to pick one thing, is kind of your biggest challenge as an entrepreneur in heading this company?
Staying focused is probably, I think, the biggest challenge, not only for us, but also for any entrepreneur. You see opportunity everywhere, and we have seen this happen not only in the immersive industry, but all over the place, is that, a lot of opportunities come in to do things like production or become an agency or do distribution or build hardware, and so you have all these real opportunities coming, and it was hard for us to stay focused on distribution and distribution technology. And in the early days, it seemed like that was a bad bet because we were missing all of these things that were coming to us, but those would have been short-term opportunities that sacrificed the long-term vision. And so being able to see what 3 years from now is going to look like and staying focused on that and keeping all of the really smart people around you who are also seeing all of these opportunities floating around, keeping them on track, keeping them focused, keeping them excited, all of those combine into a core quality that I think entrepreneurs have to win.
All right. Well, it's been a real pleasure, Tony.
Yeah, thank you.
Much more success.
Thank you.
From the Nasdaq market site in Times Square, this is Business Rockstars.